Thank you, Sarah, and lovely to see you all. Thanks for joining. Lots of people on here, which is great. I will just share my screen and pop that into present mode. Hopefully that can be seen. Yeah, all good.
Yes, it can. Yeah.
Great. Cool. So as Sarah said, today we were going to talk a little bit about what Lavanda does, but more importantly, what flex rentals are and how they could be used. I would really, more than encourage questions. Please feel free to interrupt. Just say hi, ask questions in the chat. I don't want to inflict death by PowerPoint on anybody, so please do, interrupt. I think I've met a number of people before at the last event, and we will also be there at the next in-person event in a couple of weeks. So you can also follow up in person, but please never hesitate to say hi. So just as a very quick introduction, my name is Fred. I'm the CEO of Lavanda. My surname is from Denmark, in case I get that question, which I always do. But I've been in the UK pretty much my whole life. And we have been going for nearly 10 years in residential accommodation PropTech. We're a UK-based business with about 60 team members. So we are relatively new to university land, which is partly why we've been spending quite a while with yourselves and other times, but we've been going for a fair amount of time. And our mission is essentially to improve student well-being by making student accommodation more flexible, crucially more affordable, more accessible, and accessibly digitally first. I'll be going into this in quite a lot of detail, but this is really very centralized, particularly around that concept of affordability, which we think can be very important in today's age. So how does this work? Well, we essentially partner with universities, and we help optimize the value out of accommodation, out of that residential accommodation. We've largely started with the private operators, so the PBSA side, and we pretty much partner with most of them. So we work with over 60% of the brands, but people like Unite Students, UPP, Homes for Student, who therefore also indirectly we will obviously be working in the real world on some of the assets owned by universities. And we've been going for nearly 10 years, and we've had a role in over 200 student accommodation buildings across UK, Ireland, and we actually also operate across Europe and the US to bring a lot of learnings from different markets. And we feel somewhat uniquely positioned to be a bit of a go-between between a lot of different types of accommodation. We also have operations in co-living and build-to-rent multifamily. So we do see a few different versions of things that sometimes is helpful to bring thoughts from other sectors. And these are just some of the examples that we work with: Unite, UPP, Greystar, Hines, Collegiate, CRM, etc. So a lot of these I'm sure you partner with, or maybe third-party manage assets, etc. So today we wanted to really open a bit of a conversation around what is flex rentals, and I was going to talk through how, what does this mean? It's a relatively new phrase and a new concept, although people will have done it in different guises for many years. But it's becoming a bigger impact as people are seeking to optimize their assets more and more throughout the whole year. And obviously for universities, we're all very aware of how financially under pressure universities are. And being able to generate more income out of those assets is obviously super important for the overall budget. And for those that aren't aware, there's a huge amount of potential positive for local economy, which we can go into in terms of bringing people in periods of the year where buildings are more empty or there's less people around. So just to kind of go to the basics, what is flexible rentals? So really it's between kind of three pillars of why this exists. So for renters, a lot of renters nowadays want a completely digital experience. They're often booking from abroad. They're wanting that digital first experience, ideally via the mobile, not even via desktop. They potentially want to be able to rent more flexibly. So we'll go into that in a second, which is crucial, but by the day, week, month, year, rather than kind of just fixed things. Furnished versus unfurnished, be able to pick the location within a building and decide upon amenities and other things. But then you also crucially have two other audiences. You have the underlying university assets, so the actual buildings, the kind of economics of that building, who potentially need more flexibility to address different legislation, but certainly want to drive down affordability for students. It's obviously becoming more and more expensive to be a student, but increasingly also need to generate income out of that. So how do you balance those two difficult objectives? And for the commercial teams or the operational teams, if there are voids, they need to have different solutions to be able to fill that. How do they run that efficiently? How do they do the operations? And how do they potentially, reduce that burden on students is a complicated topic. So one of the trends we've seen, and this is particularly in the PBSA area, is obviously very simply, if you're paying for 52 weeks, you're paying 52 weeks as a student of a certain amount of price. If there is a way to start offering 41-week leases in a way that economically makes sense for the whole, that is probably one of the biggest drivers of bringing down student accommodation costs. There are a lot of students who obviously don't necessarily need the asset or their room during the summer, but there isn't necessarily previously been a really holistic system to kind of understand that at a building level basis and how to fill that. Equally, when buildings are filled, obviously, as you know, by September, and once you've gone through clearing, if there are empty beds or empty units or clusters or en suites, etc., filling those at that point is extremely difficult. Realistically, a lot of people just accept that void and get to the end of the year and kind of that's it really. Where we think there's a much more sophisticated digital and analytical approach that can be had to this. The other angle, which I'd be curious on thoughts on, typical student lease lengths is very variable across the whole of Europe. I mean, you've got kind of Portugal 6 months, France 9 months. Denmark is rolling from where I'm from with a 1-month break, which is very, very topical. And there's a lot in the news now. I won't necessarily speculate on where the legislation is going, but there's a lot in the in the media, out there that essentially lease length changes are coming. In certain markets like France, it's quite typical for students as they might leave for one reason or another throughout that first year, essentially to be able to break that contract and hand back those beds. So that can be quite tricky when you're dealing with obviously the fixed costs of a student building. Yeah, as the year goes on, you've almost got sort of a triangle of voids that start opening up somewhat unpredictably. I don't know if anybody brave enough as a first comment, but has any thoughts about how they might manage that, or is that a concern for anybody that they are thinking about how the rules might be changing around long-term assured tenancies? All right, I'll keep going. It is a big topic in a lot of partners that we're working with, and we think could be something that is worth thinking about. We were going to just try a little poll for fun for in the Teams chat. So the question we wanted to ask was, what percentage of your beds, just obviously very roughly, are available for flex or summer? So if you think about your beds, let's say 1,000 beds, what percentage of those have you historically or intend to make available for flex or summer? So I think if you go to the chat function, that hopefully should be nice and easy to do, and we can maybe have a look at that a bit later once people have had a chance to do that. So talking a little bit about what flex can mean. So we often see within a lot of our partners, obviously, as you know, students tend to stay outside of the summer, so they will stay up until that summer period, and then obviously tend to leave. There's a lot of research that's gone into what impact that actually has on communities and towns, and where you have a lot of restaurants, shops, amenities, those things are positively impacted when people are there, right? And so ultimately, if the summer is completely empty, you might not have that kind of footfall. So if you essentially optimize your building all year round and you make sure that the summer is full of different people, that can also help bring in that economy to the community, and particularly in larger assets where you start to get more sophisticated amenities like restaurants, bars, etc. It can also help drive revenue into that space. The other angle is that this also starts to be able to effectively revolutionized the whole digital first experience. So with our partners, we often put in place an ability to book online digitally through a modern kind of online travel agency type platform. And that allows you to create a really lovely branded experience that enables booking in all sorts of different ways, both for full year round, but also for those summer or shorter tenancies. And an example here, we've worked with Greystar Chapter across largely in London for that sub brand. We're on our 5th consecutive year with them, so really, quite a mature piece of work with them. And we're across 12 buildings with them, and we generated about 2.8 million in revenue just in that summer period. So this can be a very material part of the income pie, if that makes sense. I've just seen a message. It won't let me vote due to restrictions on IT. We've been
apologies for that. I thought it was going to work. I'll have a look at that behind the scenes. Thanks, Sarah.
We've been beaten by IT. Okay, no worries. Well, what I was going to compare it to was some data that we've managed to research around. So what we looked at was and spoke to a few different partners who looked at what percentage of rooms were made available. So these are universities, so these are not private, these are actual universities, so people like yourselves. And there was about 50-60 that were sampled. And what we can show is a huge variety, and I think it's super interesting. So on the left, it's what percentage of the rooms, which was the poll, which we tried our best to do, what percentage of those rooms had been made available. So you've got a real spectrum there from a couple of answers that were all of them, all the way down to a number of different people who obviously don't do it at all. But a really big spectrum of what's interesting there in terms of that. But what I also thought was really interesting is then what was the amount of revenue that had been generated for those universities. And it's obviously a massive spectrum here. So the one that had come back the highest was £4 million they had generated for the university just over that summer period, and then obviously a huge variation down to nil. And I think a lot of that is through to optimization and how much this is embraced. But the point being that this can be a very, very material commercial enhancement to revenues for student accommodation. And very, very happy to kind of talk about that further. So I don't know if just in terms of what is Flex, did that make sense? Is there anyone who wanted to ask any questions around that in terms of how they've approached it or thoughts? I'll have a sip of coffee.
I don't mind jumping in. Hi. So we are with you guys. So with our with UPP down in our Bay campus, right. We're utilising Lavanda for our summer month. And it's been working really well, incredibly well. So, for example, we recently did a campaign to our alumni, asking them if they wanted to stay on the summer, come back. So that was really good. So yeah, there are incredible opportunities. I think one of the concerns we've got is around sort of like legislation, especially now for the term time. Things have come up around council tax and use of building, etc., to overcome. But in terms of the opportunity, it's huge, especially because we're on the beach as well. So from a tourist perspective, if we're able to do that, is unbelievable.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing, Sarah. And I'm glad that was has been a positive experience. Yeah, I mean, I guess a couple of things you highlighted there I think is really interesting. Universities tend to have accommodation in actually super interesting locations across the UK. It's actually quite close to my heart in a sense, because I think a lot of this inventory and beds are also essentially available at quite an attractive price point. When you think about when people stay and travel in the UK, if you want to go visit your brother-in-law in Brighton, or you want to go to Edinburgh because your friends had a baby, to take a relatively small thing in a hotel or you know, for a week or two, or visit a family member who's ill, can be incredibly expensive. And actually, what's wonderful about student accommodation is that in a broad sense, because it's a relatively discrete amount of beds and size, it can make a lot more money than from students in that circumstance, but actually be very, very attractive as a sort of destination, whether it's on the beach or whether it's sort of cathedral town or a city. So on that hand, it's really attractive. The other thing that we have built and spent a lot of time on is also being able to segment just for students. So one factor that is important is obviously whether the building has the ability to host students or not, and then the choice about whether you want to have students or not. So what tends to happen with our partners is that all year round, once they go through September, October, and they've done clearing, we then look at how many beds are available straight away. And often most of our partners then want to just focus on students only, because obviously there is a welfare thinking. You need to be thoughtful about the building. Sometimes if there's lots of voids, you might segment a floor or a part of the building. But if it's more pepper pot beds, we would think more about sort of looking for like 1-2 month students who we can specifically segment for. And that actually also opens up accommodation for a lot more people, because there are people who stay at home, for example, for a lot of the year because they can't afford accommodation, but they would love to be close to the university for maybe for exams or for specifically like lab work. And there's also, you know, different variations of that. Also people internationally who are still students, who might be coming over just for one semester or, you know, one part of the term, etc. So that's very attractive. And then in the summer, people tend to flip it. And because the building tends to be very empty, they are more focused on sort of anybody staying, quote unquote. However, our platform allows you to very much segment for that kind of audience. So for example, it might not be appropriate for children, it might not be appropriate for families, but it might be more focused on X, Y, Z. So that's kind of, you know, something that works well. And we've also over time, because, you know, frankly, we are very much about trying to be the adult in this room and trying to be a long-term relationship with all our partners. It also comes down to an asset by asset basis and location and what works well. And we love building on long-term partnerships, because that's really where you get the site team's really excited about it and focused on it and kind of working well for everyone. Cool. Any other questions before I move on? Right, well, there'll be lots more chances. So how could this kind of, you know, work for you? So, you know, one of the things that we're very conscious of is the, you know, the kind of the role of people in this space. So, you know, often there are individuals or very small teams who've been tasked with managing between, you know, 1 to 10,000 university-owned beds. You know, it's a lot. There's often many different hats on. So, you know, it could be managing things like events, group bookings, language schools, sports, you know, student bookings. You know, there's a you know, a lot going on there. And while people obviously put down the best placed plans they can for the year ahead, market shift and dynamic shift and lease lengths change and all this kind of stuff. And ultimately, I do think almost everyone I meet in student wants to be innovative, wants to bring a lot of different ideas. So we try and shoulder as much of that and be as supportive of that in terms of effort and time and energy. And that's something we're really kind of focused on and really trying to be a long-term partner for yourselves. And I'll come on to a bit how we do that in terms of analysis and support and operational support. You know, we're very conscious that filling buildings can be, you know, quite tricky when you're dealing with a modern world with many different types of bookings possible and channels that people book by. You obviously have your student leases that come through various different, you know, methodologies, whether it's nominations or direct bookings or, you know, marketplaces. But for sort of non-students, we've seen a huge amount of range. You know, you've got kind of group bookings, language schools, you've got summer short stays, which are leading to events. And there's a lot of different things that often technology partners or other sort of supporters don't really, you know, cater for. And so in that world, we see things like short stay students who might be there just for one term or visiting from abroad. Short stays in the form of tourism or staycation. Staycation tends to be the big thematic in the UK. Then there's also midterms and corporate travel, which is quite different. We've worked before with things like corporates who might book, like, for example, intern programs. So they might, if they have 30, 40 interns coming for the summer for XYZ, booking a student accommodation is fantastic about that. And similar for public sector travel. Again, obviously there have been bigger thematics back in the past, but often there's a need for those kind of government type placements where 30, 40 beds again for a period of time is really helpful. I'm curious if anyone does this come under people's remit on this on this call? Is this a sort of area that is easy to manage or difficult, or something that anyone would love to ask questions on? Go on. Got a couple of hands there. Martin, I think you were first.
Yeah, happy to jump in. I mean, certainly within remit, certainly something we try and do. Obviously, like you say, maximise revenue from the estate outside of the main term time, particularly, and then also, the challenges with balancing different short-term course lengths. I guess it is just the often last-minute nature of knowing what's going to be available, mixing in whether that's demand capacity for the main cohort, which obviously you don't get clarity until after the results day, or even close to to the start of term, and then into the summer, just the different challenges balancing compliance works, estates works, refurbishment. So it's often short lead time in terms of what's going to be truly available, what can be turned around. So they're the main issues, I guess.
What's worked? Do you feel you've got good systems in place to sort of support that, or is it something that ends up becoming quite manual because of the frenetic nature of it, or just genuinely?
Yeah. I think it's often, as with all these things, it's ultimately having to use multiple systems. So there's not that one system where you can kind of keep all that information. The student booking system doesn't necessarily do this side of it. Therefore, you end up relying on either more manual processes, back to spreadsheet, or using other systems that are available out there. But they're never all then tied together to allow for a single point of information.
Yeah, and that's I'm not surprised to hear that that's kind of often a common complaint in this area. Phil, I think, were you next?
Yeah, thanks. So probably echoing a little bit of what Martin's just said. We took a view some years ago to reverse the process where our recruitment team would be dictating the rooms, and then say, by the way, you've got 500 rooms back the third week of August, go and sell them. And obviously that doesn't work. So we have got a slightly different approach on campus. We've also got a small 62-bed hotel, and we've got a system whereby we use a little hotelier now. Jonathan's on the call from here as well, and he may be able to give a bit more detail if it's needed. But we have therefore bridged that gap of having two systems. Mm-hmm. But what we have done now is we've worked over the last 3 years on pivoting student rooms. We allocate the last of the rooms that are adjacent to the hotel, so they become, in effect, self-catered hotel stay. Yeah. So doing all of the stuff that you've kind of talked about, but I'm intrigued to find out a little bit more, because we need to work harder in this space. But yeah, so we have taken a view, and again, Jonathan will be able to talk about it, but we uplifted revenue at the first year we did it by about 350, 400K. So it was a successful piece, but each year we go back to the drawing board because we don't know how many rooms we're going to be left with. Yeah. So you build up relationships with these third parties. If I may, could I just ask one question though? I was intrigued at the beginning that you talked about 41, 42 week optimum to be, I guess, less costly for students. How did the PBSAs respond to that? Because you obviously serviced most of them. Mm-hmm. Have you given them that recommendation, and what did they say?
Yeah, great question. So you won't be surprised the first time I said that I got thrown out of the room. But the evolution's been really interesting. So I would say, look, most people, if they could, in the PBSA side, initially, if they could just get 52 weeks at a great rent that goes up by 10% every year, of course, that's what they're, like, generally speaking, going to be going for, because they're purely largely economically driven, right? And I don't think that's not a critique of our customers. That's because of the nature of it. I think what's evolved, though, quite quickly is a realization on a number of different angles. So one is that I don't think, when you speak privately with a lot of other partners or customers, the high-end student market, where you constantly build for very expensive inventory that you then are selling to I think a sort of a relatively small segment of the student audience, that can't sustain a never-ending kind of cycle of building for that and price increases for that. And so you need to start thinking a bit more holistically about the burden on the actual student's pocket, and how much is this realistically going to be able to sustain. So I think that's one important factor. So depending on where the building is, and typically this works best in sort of 3 different locations. One is the big cities, so London, Manchester, Edinburgh, etc., but also places with cathedrals, sort of typically. So relatively, you know, destination towns across, but that could be Oxford, Cambridge, you know, all the sort of nice large mid market towns in the UK, and a lot of coastal locations. So it might be like Bournemouth and other things, which have this natural high value summer, that when you then really analyze the data, and I'll come on to how we do that, it is actually, even if you just have no social agenda, I do personally have a social agenda because I do think it's really important to bring down the cost, but even if you ignore that, you can make more income from the 41 weeks plus than the hospitality stays in the summer. One thing that held that back was that in the past, when discussions have been made with planners about what should be allowed during the summer, it often hasn't been a topic about whether that should be anybody or student only. It's just not. It's just an easy give to the planning authorities to say, sure, we'll just keep them a student, because there weren't really sophisticated options in the past, and relying on kind of language schools that come and go and all that kind of stuff has been perceived as too risky. But now a lot of student operators are actively pushing for changes to their summer usage to be able to allow non-students to stay there, so that they can then optimize for this model. So, but I would probably say that's about half the audience. The other half of the audience are less interested, if I'm honest, in that kind of split. However, what they really like is having a partner like Lavanda as a backup policy, because if they are struggling at some point in their, let's say, their base case, then it's too late almost to bring in some sort of idea if you're in kind of April, May, right? If you suddenly have a year where a lot of language schools fall away, or, you know, for whatever reason, students start giving notice early, or those extensions don't come in, which typically happens around March, April, it's very, very last minute to engage something to fill that gap. You tend to end up getting hit by that gap. So what you find is that I'd say probably half of our partners, and this is not, you know, this is just the strategy, they have it as more of an insurance policy and a backstop to fill the inventory if they don't manage to fill it with 50, 51, 52 weeks. And that's totally fine from our side. I mean, that's just how they, you know, we're very flexible in how you can deploy it. But I think some people are embracing it and trying to figure out a best way to do it in the market, and some people are using it more as a backstop. And then also you've obviously got some areas where legislation is forcing the hand, right? So for example, in Dublin now, you know, we'll see how it all plays out, but essentially, you know, the government has stepped in to say that they don't want leases to be all year. So everybody will have to do something in the summer. And, you know, there's 10, 15,000 beds there, you know, including pipeline. So a lot of activity will happen there. But I would say it's probably, to be fair, it's probably 2 different camps there. Personally, I think that for university, there is that really important goal of bringing down the cost for students as a purely sort of how do we help and encourage students, and I think that's a really worthy goal in itself, personally.
Thanks.
I could probably add a bit of flavour there as well, Fred. As a Lavanda user and PBSA with around 50,000 students living with us across the UK, lots of different cities. The dual system actually isn't as painful as you might think. So we use KX, as many of you do, as a core tenancy booking platform for students, and we use Lavanda for pretty much everything else. So the synchronization doesn't happen because we've not deliberately forced it to happen. Rooms are blocked out for non-KX core student activity, and they're then given to Lavanda, and that works actually really well, having it in two separate systems. Appreciate the point around kind of summer turnarounds or refurbishment works. Obviously, in the same way, KX doesn't allow you to do that. You can only really block out the room. There's not really a silver magic solution to put it all in one place. But the pain of operating two different booking platforms is not actually a thing. That it's very seamless, and hats off to Fred and the team at Lavanda for making that, because that was a big concern for us as well. Just to answer and give some flavour onto the shorter student core contracts, as Fred said before, if most of our clients, for example, would like a nice 52 week continual contract, it's taking time for them to come round to the rationale, and actually the way we've managed to reinforce that point is it's not the opportunity isn't with students in the main. So without giving any kind of figures or trade secrets away, but the student proportion of our overall Lavanda provision, which is well over £1 million nationally, the student proportion of that is around 10%. So actually, it's the non-student that's driving a lot of the there's less sensitivity around rates generally, and two, there's a lot more demand for non-students from non-students than students over that time, generally speaking. So within KX, you might still get an extension here, or students staying on over the summer, or summer placement maybe for a orthoptics or nursing course. But in the main, the summer opportunity is very much non-students, as Freddie said, in those highly popular towns. Another point that I just wanted to ask, and this is really a shout out to the room. One of our challenges is Lavanda's been a runaway success. So actually, in some cities, we run out of beds, and maybe if you're thinking, could Lavanda be a good fit for institution, I'd really be interested in talking to you about how do we maybe look at Lavanda as a channel manager for, say, for example, we have a property in the city that fills up. We then have to turn away a lot of business, and I'd really love to send it your way. From an institutional perspective, it does sound like the right thing to do in terms of activity and traffic. If there's for whatever reason, if one property is doing a lot more trade than others, I'd be really interested in exploring how we can refer into university bed spaces, and whether or not maybe, Freddie, there might be a solution possibly to do that. That's sadly one of the Achilles heels of KX. Everyone's on their own version of KX and their own, like, I can't see Jeanette's beds, she can't see my beds over in Bangor. However, it'd be really cool if that could be a thing, particularly for summer, not necessarily across the year, but for summer, where there is almost like, what is the city opportunity, or what is the city critical mass of availability over the summer? That'd be really cool. So one for the notebook there, Freddie, in terms of a request, but we'd love to push business to universities' way over the summer. So please feel free to reach out to me direct about that. Thank you.
No, love it, and that super great points you've added in there. Before we jump to the next question, just a couple of bits there. So we didn't set this up, but it's a great segue into a couple of things that I'll flag towards the end of this. One thing, we do see people essentially a form of sort of try before you rent kind of concept, where people will actually stay in the summer and then will book accommodation later, which is a really interesting thing. So we are heavily looking at that right now, about how to sort of better sort of open that as a form of then booking on to take on full-year leases. So that's a really interesting angle. And then I guess, yeah, just on the two platform thing. So for the complete avoidance of doubt, we designed the initial version of Lavanda as a property management system that started on short stays and can work alongside any existing technology. So that's KX, StarRes, whatever. We can work alongside that super happily, and that's great. We have now also in the last sort of 5 or 6 years built out a full short, medium, and long-term booking platform, and that's actually what we just announced we're rolling out with Unite. So that's going to be a really big customer where we will be the source of truth and essentially merging those two systems. So our vision is essentially a world where you can use us if you're really happy with your KX, etc., and that's totally fine, and we'll just keep adding value there. However, there is an option if people are at some point thinking about those tenders and what their full PMS wants to be like, and if they want to combine it all in one, that is something that we have in the market and are frankly signing up partners to all the time, and could have a conversation with anyone at any point. But I just wanted to flag that. Wayne, I think I can't actually see the hands. I can only see one hand, but I think Wayne's next.
Yes, thanks. And I was just going back to what Lee said, really. I think that's really exciting, actually, what you just said, because actually there's a lot of universities in quite hot tourist destinations that actually are a good alternative for families to use for holidays and stuff like that. So I'd be really interested in continuing that conversation there. We're literally just going through a tender process at the moment for our online booking tool for our accommodation. So Lavanda, obviously you presented to us earlier in the week, so which was great. But it's really interesting to hear you guys talking about it, and I didn't realize you were in so many different places, to be honest with you. So we're finding this quite useful, me and Cecilia.
Yeah, I have a slight joke running that we're an overnight success that took 10 years. So we've been building in the background a lot, and it's something that we are really focused on. And if I'm completely honest as well, my view is that the level of technology in place in residential accommodation is actually very, very, very low when you think about how much technology goes into kind of ordering a sandwich on Uber Eats or all these other sort of adjacent verticals, or if you go onto a random whatever your favorite shopping thing is online and what the website experience and all that kind of stuff. There's just so much that could be brought to real estate. Now, having said that, we understand that budgets are tight and things need to make economically sense, and so we've sort of been going gradually and focusing first on that short stays because we knew that could add value immediately. It's not a cost line, it's adding revenue to the building, which is really, really important. But we do think that consolidating the short stays and the long stays is our long game, and where we can then build more and more value on top for residents. I won't go into it now, but we've got a lot of really exciting stuff around AI and Lavanda. We've got an internal R&D team called Lavanda Labs that's doing lots and lots of really interesting stuff on that space, which we could happily do a whole nother session on, and maybe we'll see if that's an option in the future. But I think there's an awful lot of really exciting things that you can bring to solving some of these quite difficult balancing act kind of jobs, and then really like open people's capability to then focus more on the actual well-being, the students, and yeah, like I said before, I think there's two big areas of affordability that's really close to our heart. One is bringing the student burden down, and I just personally I can't see any other way of doing that unless you reduce the rent. It's just a huge part of their cost base. And then secondly, opening student accommodation as a sort of mid-market option in loads of geographies where it isn't possible, right? And we all know, especially in the cost of living pressure in a lot of coastal towns where homes are being turned into Airbnbs and all that kind of stuff, that's not great for society in any way, shape or form, especially when you've then got a student building down the road with 200 beds that could be open, right? That's 200 beds that could serve that summer. So there's lots of really interesting sort of non-economic angles as well. Cool. So I'll keep going, but please, I'll stop for more questions as well. But you know, one of the things that's probably interesting from our side is we meet a lot of people in universities who've sort of figured out some of it on their own, and they're very entrepreneurial, and we think that's really awesome. But we do think there's a lot more value that can be added by exposing essentially the building to all the possible channels of demand, and then thinking through how that economics flows through. So whether it's filling empty rooms during term time, filling empty rooms during the summer, and then kind of holistically looking at that, and then also driving value into the community, and you know, the shops, the bars, and a lot of student owned or student revenue shared commercial enterprises that are around a building can also be benefited from that as well. And holistically, that's kind of what we think of as kind of flexible rentals. We've talked a little bit about this, but we were going to kind of pop in a poll. I guess we might not be able to do that, actually, thinking about it. Okay,
it's not working, unfortunately. I'm really sorry.
No, not at all. We were beaten by the admins, but we actually did allude to this a little bit. I'll leave this. I'll sort of leave this as an open Q&A at the end as well. But we talked a little bit already about the two platforms and all that kind of thing. But I think what's really interesting for us, and we would love to have this conversation afterwards with anybody, is, you know, essentially, is the role of technology here helping you or not? Because I think there's also a concept of death by too many platforms, too many things to log into, too many different competing things. And for us, we're really keen to try and simplify that and make things simpler, basically. And we're not sure that that is the case in existing technology that people have. So maybe going a bit more practical, how do we help? This is, you know, not meant to be a sales pitch, but just a clarification. So we essentially kind of work along three angles. One is the kind of what should I do kind of concept. So we have loads of data and lots and lots of information around, and I'll give you an example, but shows you how the commercial opportunity plays out. Basically, what could you make in a given place, location, building type, quality, and at different points in the year, and how much revenue can that essentially provide, which is really important, because if you don't know, you don't know, right? You're guessworking, which is obviously a huge part of this. And then essentially, how should I do it? So we have our own technology stack, and then we have different operational models. We have an operational model where we, with a local partner, basically take care of all of it. We have another version where we effectively empower you to do it yourself. So there's a real kind of range there. And we often find that it may not be equal. I mean, I know most people here will have geographically sort of co-located buildings, roughly speaking, so they don't have the issue necessarily, but sometimes you might have a building that's a little bit further away from campus, and actually that one operationally won't work for you. You'd rather someone else takes care of that summer. Equally, other people might just have a scale or team or etc. to take care of it. So we're very flexible on that. And then we have lots and lots of analysis and data around what reporting on outcomes. You know, what is the impact? What did this actually do? And the ability to survey students and guests alike on the experience, and feed that back into the following year's program. With all of our PBSA partners, we work all year round with them, and it really is important to maybe think about that. Is that if I had one plea for any of this, it would be, don't leave this till May, because you know, it's the type of thing where obviously September you're focused on that core student demographic, but really as soon as you're past September, you want to be thinking about, okay, well, where did I end up on my units? Like, what beds are full? What possible term time I might do? And even if you're not doing term time, crucially, what can I get live on whatever channel I want to do before Christmas? There's a lot of booking that happens before Christmas for the following summer. You know, people plan trips, think about options, and really you want to then have everything nice and live before Christmas that can then be booked throughout the Q1, Q2, and into the summer. And it's really a year round, and then you kind of get back to end of summer and you're kind of then reviewing, how do the operations go, how do the reviews go, and what can I improve for the next cycle. So we, you know, in whatever version of that, we support our partners all year round. And then really what we particularly bring at this point in the year is a lot of data. So this is an example of what we call an impact analysis. So we are supported by a lot of institutions with data. It's not a secret that people like Airbnb and Booking and others really want to support companies like Lavanda, and they do it specifically because we are a way of them accessing regulated, legitimate beds, frankly, that, you know, that create legitimacy for the platform, is legitimate for the platform, that actually is a form of responsible and professional hosting. And that kind of is the mecca of what everybody really wants. They want well-run buildings in great locations, offering good priced nights. That is kind of, you know, in a sense, what everybody wants. So we have lots of great data, and I'm more than happy. You know, we do this for lots of different partners in different ways, and, you know, in many ways we're just trying to inform the market and help support this. So regardless, if anybody would like any kind of data or analysis on their portfolio, please, you know, get in touch. We'd be more than happy to talk about it. And then equally on the technology review, you know, there was talk today of tenders and different things. We're always available to talk through technological options, even if it's not for now. We'd be more than happy to demo and other things, because, you know, we are here in the long game, and for us, all that feedback is really, really helpful. We never build anything because we just magically think it up. We need to always be testing ideas, talking about different concepts, getting that feedback from everybody out there in the real world, and trying to solve real world problems, not problems that we've thought up on our whiteboards. But yeah, that was the end of Death by PowerPoint, but we got some good questions in. Was there anything anyone wanted to ask, or anything to go back on, or anything we could help with? Lee.
Hiya. Just really going back to that, demand analysis is big for us. So whilst we've plugged Lavanda in to the national picture, we are in many cases, because you said it's good quality accommodation, regulated, great staff, great experience, whether that's for student or non-student. The problem is, in some cities we are hitting capacity very quickly. So trying to understand, I guess, from a Lavanda to us, and maybe to the rest of the sector, just understanding some of the demand pinch points, that could possibly help maybe some of the institutions on the call with a rationale in that, like, is it actually, you're saying before that the software shouldn't be seen as a cost, it should be seen as a revenue generation tool. And often, in order to get stuff off the ground, you've got to put a bit of a business case together. If demand could be highlighted, I guess that would be really helpful. If you have got a national picture, just to get a feel for it. What's the demand like in Lincoln? What's the demand like in Nottingham, in Sussex? What does that look like from a position of is there too much or, you know, a good healthy demand in that area? That's certainly something we'd look at as a national provider.
Yeah, that's great, and absolutely, we're launching a lot of market tools that can help inform that. And yeah, you're exactly right. Like, there will be certain locations that, you know, for whatever reason are not necessarily the most attractive for sort of you know, staycations or travel for some reason, and at the same time has a lot of supply, and so that will kind of break the equation. And then there's lots of places where, you know, Bath, for example, which is perennially kind of short supplied, and a very attractive location. But yeah, that's a good point, and something we'll definitely be adding more on.
Yeah, it'll help us adjust contract lengths. So, for example, if we have a studio scheme, let's say in town, and it's on 51-week contracts only, actually there's probably a good strong case for that to be adjusted to enable some more shorter term contracts. And maybe the 51-week inquiries, we could push those to the universities if they have capabilities for that, but don't have maybe the non-student consent. And that's again probably another Achilles heel of other systems, is that they're not all connected and they don't all talk. And if there was a way of surfacing that data within Lavanda, we'd very much be interested in helping to inform that picture for a lot of the institutions on the call.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be great. Yeah, very keen on helping with that. Cool. Superb. Well, thank you for the great question. Thumbs up. Yeah, good. Any last questions or Otherwise, I would just say, genuinely, our door is always open. We love spending time with customers, and it can be in whatever format. We've got lots of people based here and around the UK. We're a remote company, which means that we have an office in London, but we actually have people all over the UK, and we'd love to meet and say hi or share a bit of data. But equally, we'll also be at pretty much all the student conferences, whether PBSA or higher education, over the next busy calendar in the next couple of weeks and months. So we'd love to spend a bit of time together. So please do reach out and say hi.
Excellent. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for today's session, Fred. It's been very, very interesting to find out that Lavanda do and how it can benefit not only our members but partners as well. As I mentioned at the start of the call today, we have recorded today's session, so that will be made available shortly in the members area. Are you able to share your slides from today as well, Fred?
Absolutely. Yeah,
fantastic.
absolutely.
So I'll get those uploaded into the members area as well. And yeah, thank you again to Fred and the team from Lavanda for contributing to today's session. And as Fred's mentioned, they will be at the winter conference in Loughborough in a couple of weeks' time if anybody wants to meet with them.
Excellent.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.